This is not financial advice. Do not make investment decisions based on our deep dive today.
Right. Yeah, we always have to get that out of the way first.
Exactly. Okay, so now that the legalities are completely out of the way, I want you, the listener, to just sit back and imagine something with me for a second.
Okay, setting the scene.
Yeah, just imagine a rock. Just a dense, sort of silver gray piece of rock, and it's sitting right there in the palm of your hand.
Right.
It's heavier than you'd expect. It's cold to the touch. But this isn't just any rock. This is, it's basically the ultimate paradox of the natural world.
Really is.
Because depending entirely on how you treat this specific piece of dirt, it has the potential to either power an entire bustling metropolis, keeping the lights on, the servers humming, the hospitals running for a century without a single puff of smoke.
Or it could do the exact opposite.
Exactly. Or, in a matter of microseconds, it can cause just the most unimaginable world-ending destruction. So today, we are talking about the spicy dirt.
I love that term, the spicy dirt.
We are talking about the heavy metal itself. We are doing a deep dive into uranium.
And it really is probably the most misunderstood element on the entire periodic table. What makes our exploration today so fascinating is the source material we're pulling from.
Oh man, the sources for this one are wild.
Right. Because we aren't just looking at the hard physics or, the chemical properties of this heavy metal. We've got this incredibly bizarre, almost comical dual stack of sources that lets us look at this from completely opposite ends of the human experience.
The contrast is just hilarious to me. On one hand, we have this wildly entertaining transcript from a cultural commentary show called the B&2 Channel, shout out to their episode 18, which just goes through the most bizarre, unbelievable, borderline crazy stories from the history of uranium.
Yeah, it's full of these jaw-dropping historical anecdotes that you are definitely going to want to steal to impress your friends at the pub.
For sure. And then on the exact other end of the spectrum, we have our hands on this highly confidential, incredibly dense hedge fund investment proposal.
Right, which maps out the modern economic megatrends of what they're calling the global nuclear renaissance.
Which is such a crazy pivot, but merging those two sources is crucial, right?
Oh, absolutely. Because you simply cannot talk about uranium without running headfirst into extreme political and cultural viewpoints. And the hedge fund actually does a brilliant job of outlining these lenses objectively.
Yeah, they lay it out really clearly.
Throughout this deep dive, we're going to see the world through a far left-centric view, which focuses heavily on environmental debt, the inherent dangers of corporate greed, and this concept of the resource curse.
Right.
But we're also going to see the exact opposite, the far right-centric view, which is entirely focused on total energy dominance, national prestige, and this, hyper-pragmatic belief that humanity's destiny is basically to conquer the elements for geopolitical leverage.
And just to be crystal clear with you listening right now, we are not endorsing either of these extreme political views.
No, not at all.
We are just putting them on the table because they heavily dictate the reality of the global market we see today. We're just the messengers here.
Exactly.
But I have to admit, reading through these sources, the very first thing that absolutely shattered my brain was the timeline.
The timeline is totally counterintuitive.
Right. I think if you go out on the street right now and ask 100 people when uranium was discovered, 99 of them are going to say it's a 20th century invention.
Oh, for sure. They picture, scientists in the 1940s in secret underground labs dealing with glowing green goo.
Exactly. And that is just completely wrong.
It is entirely wrong. Uranium is a naturally occurring element. It was forged in supernovae billions of years ago.
It's literally everywhere.
Yeah, it's in the soil under your feet right now. It's suspended in the seawater of the oceans. It is not some alien substance that crashed to Earth on a meteor in 1939. And to prove exactly how ancient our relationship with it is, we just have to look at the ruins of the Roman Empire.
Okay, let's go there. Let's travel back to the year 79 AD. We are near Naples, Italy, right in the shadow of Mount Vesuvius. And archaeologists in the modern era are digging around in these ancient ruins, dusting off the ash, and they unearth these incredible Roman glass mosaics.
Right.
And the glass has this incredibly vibrant, almost unearthly, weird yellow-green tint to it. So modern scientists get their hands on these beautiful tiles, they run them through their mass spectrometers, and they find out that this fabulous yellow glass contains 1% uranium oxide.
The Romans were literally using radioactive material as a decorative coloring agent for their villas.
Yes. I mean, they had absolutely no concept of radiation, no Geiger counters, no understanding of atomic structure. They just found this cool, slightly greasy-looking rock in the earth, ground it up, threw it into their glass-blowing kilns, and thought, hey, this makes the mosaic floor look absolutely fabulous.
Amazing.
Imagine the elite of Rome walking around barefoot, throwing lavish banquets, spilling wine on mildly radioactive, spicy floors just for the aesthetic.
No. It's a perfect historical anchor, though, because it highlights a fundamental truth about uranium that we often forget. Like you said, it's just dirt.
Yeah.
The challenge historically hasn't been finding it. The challenge has been figuring out how to make it talk, how to unlock the energy trapped inside the atom. For the Romans, it was just a yellow dye. They were interacting with the atomic weight of the element, but they had no idea about the energy coiled up inside its nucleus.
But fast forward a few centuries, and that innocent relationship gets a lot darker.
Right. Things take a turn.
Yeah. We move to the 1500s. We are in the Erzgebirge Mountains, which sit right on the border of modern-day Germany and Czechia. And you've got these hard-scrabble miners deep underground, swinging pickaxes by torchlight, hunting for silver.
Because silver was everything back then.
Exactly. In the 1500s, silver is money. Silver is survival. But instead of silver, their pickaxes keep hitting this incredibly heavy, black, greasy, completely useless rock.
And it was everywhere in those specific mining veins. It was physically obstructing their efforts to get to the silver they desperately needed.
Right. And they despised this stuff. They called it peckblende or pitchblende. And in their language, peck translates roughly to bad luck.
Wow.
Yeah, these miners literally believed that the devil himself had placed this exceptionally heavy black rock in the earth specifically to ruin their silver haul. They thought the rock was cursed.
In this 16th century superstition, the idea of a cursed resource is actually the perfect gateway to understanding the left-centric lens outlined in the hedge fund proposal.
Oh, this is where they bring in that economic term, right?
Exactly. The miners calling it bad luck is an early, almost mythological understanding of a very real, very complex economic theory known as the resource curse, or more technically, the Dutch disease.
Okay, the Dutch disease. The hedge fund notes hammer on this. But wait, how on earth does finding a mountain of a valuable natural resource give a country's economy a disease? That makes zero sense on the surface. Like, if I find a gold mine in my backyard, I'm rich, not sick.
It's a fascinating and honestly tragic economic paradox. The Dutch disease occurs when a country or a specific region discovers a massive natural resource, let's say a massive oil reserve, or in this context, a huge vein of uranium.
Okay.
Initially, it does seem like incredible wealth. Foreign money floods in, the extractive industry booms, and the local currency skyrockets in value. But the disease part is the mechanism of what happens to everything else in that society.
Because the currency gets too strong.
Exactly, because the national currency gets so strong from the resource exports, the country's other traditional exports, like agriculture, manufacturing, or technology. They become far too expensive for the rest of the world to buy.
Oh, wow. I never thought about that.
Right. Nobody wants your wheat or your cars because your money is too highly valued. So those foundational industries are completely hollowed out and destroyed.
That's brutal.
And furthermore, the massive influx of cash from the mining sector often leads to severe political corruption, a massive wealth gap, and environmental degradation. So what looked like a blessing finding the ultimate resource ended up causing severe economic and environmental bad luck for the everyday citizens.
Okay, let me see if I have this straight. It's essentially like a guy winning a massive $100 million lottery.
Yeah.
At first, it's amazing, but the sudden wealth completely ruins his life. He quits his reliable job, he alienates all his old friends because he's throwing money around, he buys a mega mansion he can't actually maintain, and 10 years later, the lottery money dries up, he has no job skills left, he's totally isolated, and he's bankrupt.
Yeah.
The pitchblende ruins the silver mine.
That is a brilliant analogy. The left-centric view looks at the modern history of uranium mining and points directly to this phenomenon. The immense wealth generated by pulling this element from the earth often goes directly to the top, to massive multinational corporations or corrupt local governments, while the local populations are left holding the bag.
Right.
They are left with the environmental debt, the radioactive tailings, the contaminated water tables, and a hollowed-out local economy once the mine inevitably closes.
So the miners in the 1500s were actually economic prophets. They knew it was bad news.
They really were.
But the story of pitchblende doesn't end there. In 1789, which is a crazy year because it's the exact same year the French Revolution kicks off and completely upends the political landscape of the world.
Right. Huge year.
Yeah, a German chemist named Martin Heinrich Klaproth is tinkering around in his laboratory. He gets his hands on some of this bad luck pitch blend. He runs some chemical processes, dissolves it in nitric acid, neutralizes it, and finally precipitates a yellow powder. He has isolated a completely new element from the Devil's Rock.
And the timing of this isolation is crucial to what he decides to name it.
Tell me.
Just 8 years prior, in 1781, the astronomer William Herschel had discovered a completely new planet in the solar system.
Right. So Klaproth, wanting to honor this monumental astronomical discovery, names his new heavy metal element after the newly discovered planet Uranus, hence uranium.
And this brings in the opposing framework from the hedge fund, the right-centric view. Uranus was the ancient Greek god of the sky, the literal personification of the heavens.
Wow.
Right. Naming this dense, incredibly heavy rock pulled from the dark, dirty earth after the god of the sky is profoundly symbolic. From the right-centric lens, this represents a grand narrative of human triumph.
It's like conquering nature.
Exactly. It's about prestige, nationalism, and a hyper-pragmatic drive to conquer nature. Pulling an element from the dirt and naming it after the heavens implies that humanity is asserting its total dominance over the natural world. It's the genesis of the idea that we can harness the fundamental building blocks of the universe to serve our sovereign needs.
It is an incredible flex. Like, we didn't just find a rock, we found a piece of the sky. But here is the bizarre part of the timeline. Klaproth gave it a name, he put it on the periodic table, but the element just kind of sat there for another 100 years.
Pretty much.
Nobody really knew what to do with it. It wasn't until the late 19th and early 20th centuries that humanity really started to peek under the hood of the atom. And that's when uranium, and specifically its even spicier radioactive cousins, got a glow and, unfortunately, a really horrific body count.
Yeah, the transition from a geological curiosity to a dangerous, active material begins with the era of the Curies. When we talk about the early days of unraveling radiation, Marie and Pierre Curie are the absolute pioneers.
Marie Curie is the absolute jout of early chemistry and physics.
No question.
The B&2 channel transcript paints this incredibly vivid picture of her and her husband working in a literal, drafty, leaking shed in Paris. They didn't have a pristine, sterile, modern laboratory. They had imported literal tons of pitchblende, the bad luck rock, from those old mines in Bohemia.
Right.
And they are boiling it down in these massive cast iron cauldrons, stirring it with heavy iron rods, trying to isolate specific elements.
And what's crucial to understand about the mechanics of their work is their focus. They were utilizing a grueling process called fractional crystallization. They were separating out the uranium, but they noticed something deeply anomalous.
Oh, this is the crazy part.
The waste product they were leaving behind, the sludge that remained after the uranium was removed, was actually far more radioactive than the uranium itself.
So the stuff they thought was garbage was actually the prize.
Exactly. Through painstaking physical labor, processing tons of raw dirt to isolate just fractions of a single grain of material, they discovered polonium, and more importantly for the cultural impact of the time, they discovered radium.
Radium. It's a cousin of uranium, literally born from the natural radioactive decay of uranium over millions of years, but it is millions of times more radioactive. And this is where the story gets so hauntingly beautiful and deeply tragic. The sources mention this incredible cinematic detail. Marie Curie used to keep small glass vials of pure radium salts in the pockets of her lab coat.
Wow.
Yeah, she would take them out at night, set them on her bedside table, because the intense radiation ionizing the air around it caused the material to naturally luminesce. They glowed with this ethereal blue-green light. She lovingly called them her faint fairy lights.
It is a chilling image when you understand the physics of what was happening. She was carrying around a highly potent source of ionizing radiation right against her physical body.
Yeah.
The high-energy particles were actively ripping through her cells, damaging her DNA on a molecular level. And the physiological consequence was inevitable. She eventually died of aplastic anemia, which is a severe blood disease directly caused by massive, prolonged exposure to radiation. Her bone marrow simply stopped producing new blood cells.
To give you an idea of how much radiation she actually absorbed during those years in the shed, even today, over a century later, if you go to the National Library of France to study her original handwritten laboratory notebooks, you cannot just check them out like a normal library book.
Right, they're too dangerous.
Yes, You have to sign a legal liability waiver, and you have to put on a full-body protective lead suit just to read her handwriting, because the paper itself is still terrifyingly radioactive.
It perfectly illustrates the sheer, unbridled danger of these elements before humanity developed any understanding of dosimetry or protective protocols.
Yeah.
But while Marie Curie was a brilliant scientist pushing the boundaries of human knowledge for the sake of discovery, the commercialization of her discovery led to one of the darkest chapters in American labor history.
This is one of the stories from the B&2 channel, and it is honestly one of the most horrific things I've ever read. It's the story of the radium girls in the 1920s.
It's awful.
Once the general public realized radium glowed in the dark, the consumer hype was unbelievable. Corporations started putting it in absolutely everything. They sold radioactive toothpaste, claiming it would make your teeth shine. They put it in cosmetics. They sold radium-infused water as a health tonic.
It's total fad.
But the most lucrative, massive use was for the military and for consumer watches. They wanted watch dials that you could read in the dark without a flashlight.
So specialized corporations created a proprietary glow-in-the-dark paint, famously branded as Undark. And they hired hundreds of young, working-class women to work in factories, painting the tiny, delicate numbers on these watch dials.
And these girls were told by management, explicitly and repeatedly, that the paint was completely safe. In fact, because of the health fads at the time, they were told the radium might even give them a healthy glow and cure minor ailments.
Which is just
Sickening. And because painting tiny watch dials requires extreme precision, the factory managers instructed the women to use a technique called lip pointing. They would take the fine camel hairbrush, put it between their lips to bring it to a razor-sharp point, dip it in the radioactive paint, paint a tiny number on the dial, and then put it back in their mouths to repoint it. They were ingesting trace amounts of pure radium all day, every day, for years.
And the tragic novelty of it was that the girls, believing the corporate assurances, thought it was a fun, harmless substance.
Yeah. The sources say they would secretly paint their fingernails with it, and they would even paint the Undark radium paint directly onto their teeth.
Wait, on their teeth?
Yes, literally onto their teeth, so that when they went out on dates or to the speakeasy, they could surprise their boyfriends with a literal glowing smile in the dark. It is pure nightmare fuel when you think about what was happening inside their bodies.
And the physiological mechanism of that destruction is vital to understand. Radium, on the periodic table, belongs to the same group as calcium.
Oh, wow. Okay.
It is chemically similar. So when these young women ingested the radium paint, their bodies didn't recognize it as a deadly poison. Their metabolisms essentially said, oh, excellent, calcium for the bones, and actively transport the highly radioactive radium directly into their skeletal structure, particularly concentrating it in their jawbones because of the constant lip pointing.
Oh my God, the radiation was literally baking them from the inside out.
Yeah.
Their jaws crumbled. They developed a specific horrific condition the medical community called radium jaw. Their teeth fell out. Their jawbones became completely honeycombed with radiation necrosis. And many of these women died excruciating, slow, agonizing deaths in their early 20s.
This horrific historical event is actually the prime example the hedge fund uses to validate the left-centric critique of unchecked corporate power. It perfectly illustrates our second complex economic concept, externalities.
Okay, break down the mechanics of an externality for us. How does an abstract economic term apply to women losing their jawbones?
Well, an externality is a concept in economics where a corporation takes actions to maximize its own profits. But in the process of production, it creates a severe negative consequence, a massive cost, that the corporation itself does not pay for. They externalize the cost onto a third party.
Okay, I see where this is going.
Right. In the case of the radium girls, the corporation wanted fast, ultra-precise painting to sell millions of watches and generate huge dividends for their shareholders. The cost of using a highly toxic radioactive substance wasn't paid by the company in the form of expensive safe handling equipment, lead-lined ventilation, or hazard pay.
Wow.
The cost was entirely paid by the young women with their health, their jawbones, and ultimately their lives.
That is just...
Company reaped the financial reward, The workers absorbed the deadly externality. It took years of grueling lawsuits by the dying women who literally had to be carried into the courtroom to finally force changes in occupational safety laws.
So it's like a chemical factory secretly dumping toxic sludge into a public river to save millions on proper waste disposal.
Exactly.
The factory reports record profits to Wall Street, but the town 10 miles downstream pays the externality by experiencing a spike in cancer rates and having to spend municipal taxes on massive water purification systems. The profit is private, the cost is public.
Precisely. But while the radium craze was a tragic novelty, a consumer hype cycle that ended in a localized disaster, the true world-altering power of its parent element, uranium, was about to be unleashed on a global scale.
Yeah.
And to understand how that happened, we have to look away from the factories of New Jersey and look deep into the jungles of Africa during the outbreak of World War II.
This is where the narrative shifts from a tragedy of scientific ignorance to an absolute masterclass in geopolitical maneuvering. I love this story. So listener, if you were ever at a pub trivia night and the question comes up, where did the United States get the uranium to build the atomic bombs for the Manhattan Project? I guarantee almost everyone in the room is going to guess it came from somewhere in America, like a secret mine in New Mexico or Nevada.
Yeah, that's the standard assumption.
And they would be completely wrong.
The vast majority of the high-grade uranium used to birth the atomic age and end the Second World War came from a single remote location in the Belgian Congo.
A mine called Shinkolobwe. And the geological statistics on this mine are just staggering. Let me give you some context to understand how crazy this is. In a normal, highly profitable, totally viable commercial uranium mine operating today, the ore grade, meaning the actual percentage of uranium trapped in the rock you dig up, is roughly 0.1%.
Right, very low.
If a mining company finds a deposit with 1% or 2% grade, the executives are popping champagne. It's considered a world-class, incredibly rich deposit. The Shinkolobwe mine in the Congo had an average ore grade of an unbelievable, freakish 65%.
It was essentially pure weapons-grade potential sitting right there in the dirt.
Yeah.
It was frighteningly rich. Geologists to this day still have a hard time explaining the exact tectonic and hydrothermal mechanisms that caused such a concentrated freak of nature to form in that specific spot.
But the craziest part of the Shinkolobwe story isn't the rock itself. It's the guy who ran the operation.
Yeah. Edgar Singier.
Yes, his name was Edgar Singier, a Belgian mining executive. In 1939, right as the rumblings of World War II are starting to shake Europe, some British and French scientists quietly approach Singier. They tell him that this weird, heavy black rock he's been pulling out of his copper and cobalt mine as a byproduct might, theoretically, based on some brand new physics, be used to build a bomb of unimaginable city-leveling power.
Right.
Now, the politicians aren't taking this seriously yet. The U.S. military isn't even involved. But Singier is a ruthless pragmatist. He looks at the geopolitical chessboard, he looks at the rise of Nazi Germany, and he sees the megatrend coming before anyone else.
He foresaw the structural shift in global power before the governments of the world even realized the game had changed.
Exactly. So in 1940, without any government contract, without the U.S. military asking him to do it, without a single dollar changing hands, Singier quietly packs up 1,200 tons of this 65% grade uranium ore into steel drums. He ships it completely under the radar across the Atlantic Ocean, and he literally just stacks it in a random commercial warehouse in Staten Island, New York.
And then he just waits.
And then he just goes to his office in Manhattan and waits. Fast forward a couple of years, the U.S. government initiates the Manhattan Project. They realize they desperately need massive amounts of uranium to build the bomb, and they are panicking because they have absolutely no domestic supply chain.
Yep.
Singier basically walks into a meeting, raises his hand, and says, "Oh, you gentlemen need uranium. I have 1,200 tons of the purest stuff on planet Earth sitting in a warehouse down the street."
It is the ultimate real-world execution of our third complex economic term from the hedge fund document information asymmetry.
Wait, I want to try to explain this one. Tell me if I'm getting this right. Information asymmetry is when one side of a deal has a massive secret. Singier knew the theoretical physics and the absolute military necessity of his product before the buyers, the U.S. government, even realized they were in the market for it.
You're exactly right. Information asymmetry occurs when one party in an economic transaction possesses significantly more or significantly better information than the other party. Because Singier utilized his superior information to preposition the asset, when the panic inevitably hit, he was the sole supplier.
He had all the leverage.
Yes, he was able to dictate the terms of the transaction entirely. He controlled the market because he acted on asymmetric data.
It's like a guy in 1993 who somehow fully understands what the internet is going to become.
Hmm.
So he goes out and buys the domain names for Apple, Nike, Coca-Cola, and McDonald's for $10 each, years before those companies even own a computer.
That's a great way to put it.
And then he just sits on his couch and waits for the executives to call him in a panic. It is a staggering bet, and it paid off. Senghir was the first non-American civilian to receive the Medal for Merit from the U.S. government. But of course, the result of that transaction was the atomic bomb and the devastation of Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Which brings us to the post-WWII era. The war is over. Humanity now possesses these apocalyptic weapons. But as the BN2 channel transcript highlights, the scientists handling this material were still acting with an almost terrifying arrogance regarding the physical mechanics of the element.
Oh man, the demon core.
Yeah.
This story gives me sweaty palms just thinking about it. After the war, scientists at the Los Alamos laboratory were conducting what they called criticality testing. They were trying to figure out exactly how close you could bring radioactive material together and how much you could reflect the neutrons back into the material before it achieved a runaway chain reaction and went critical.
They were specifically working with a 6.2 kilogram sphere of refined plutonium, which is a man-made, highly unstable derivative created from uranium in a nuclear reactor.
A 6.2 kilogram sphere. I want you to picture a bowling ball sitting on a desk, but it's made of pure latent death.
Yeah.
And the scientists are testing its limits by slowly lowering a hollow half sphere made of beryllium over the plutonium core. Beryllium acts as a neutron reflector. As the shell gets closer, the neutrons shooting out of the plutonium bounce off the beryllium and go right back into the core, multiplying the reaction, bringing it closer and closer to going critical.
It's incredibly delicate.
So how are these brilliant world-class physicists keeping the heavy top half of the shell from closing completely and triggering a localized nuclear flash? Are they using a sophisticated multi-million-dollar robotic precision arm behind 3 feet of lead glass? No.
No, they were not. They were using a standard handheld flathead screwdriver.
A flathead screwdriver. A physicist named Louis Slotin is standing right over this thing, literally wedging the blade of a flathead screwdriver between the two halves of the sphere, twisting his wrist slightly to raise and lower the heavy beryllium shell, manually playing a game of chicken with a nuclear explosion.
It's just absurd.
He arrogantly called this procedure tickling the dragon's tail. And of course, on a Tuesday afternoon in 1946, the screwdriver slipped.
Yep.
The beryllium shell drops completely shut. The neutrons have nowhere to escape. The sphere goes critical instantly.
The physical reaction is immediate. The witnesses in the room reported seeing a brilliant, terrifying flash of blue light, which is caused by the intense radiation ionizing the air molecules in the room, a phenomenon similar to Cherenkov radiation. This was accompanied by a wave of intense, unnatural heat hitting their skin.
Slotin reacted quickly. He physically grabbed the top half of the shell and flicked it off onto the floor, stopping a full thermal explosion and saving the lives of the other men in the room. But it was too late for him. He absorbed a massive, lethal dose of hard neutron radiation in a fraction of a second. His DNA was shredded. He died an agonizing death 9 days later. And the most insane part of this story, he was the second scientist to die experimenting with that exact same core in almost the exact same careless way within a year.
Unbelievable.
That's why the staff started calling it the demon core.
This profound hubris, the sheer arrogance of using a hand tool to manipulate a world-ending elemental force, perfectly sets the stage for our third lens outlined in the hedge fund document, The Ordinary Japanese View.
Yes, the sources highlight this specific cultural lens, and I find it so beautiful and so necessary when talking about this material because Japan's relationship with the atom isn't theoretical, right?
Yeah.
It's deeply, painfully real.
In Japanese culture and history, there are two deeply rooted, somewhat opposing concepts that directly apply to their modern relationship with nuclear energy. The first is monozukuri. This translates roughly to the deep spirit of craftsmanship, the relentless pursuit of technological perfection, and the immense, almost spiritual pride in making things exceptionally well. Okay. It is the cultural drive that rebuilt Japan from the ashes of WWII into a global high-tech powerhouse. But balancing that drive is the Shinto-rooted concept of kegar.
Kegar.
Right? Kegar refers to a state of profound impurity, defilement, or an energy directly related to death and hazard that must be ritually avoided or treated with the utmost terrifying respect.
So to the Japanese perspective, uranium is the ultimate embodiment of these two massive concepts colliding.
Exactly. To the Japanese, uranium is viewed as a sleeping giant. It is not inherently evil, but it requires absolute flawless Monozukuri perfect engineering, redundant safety systems,
Yeah.
and deep reverence to harness safely.
And if you don't?
If you respect it and engineer it flawlessly, it provides immense life-giving energy. But if you are careless, if you bring impurity or arrogance to it, if you tickle the dragon's tail with a screwdriver like Louis Lotan did, the giant wakes up and deletes you. It brings Kagar.
And you see this intense, agonizing internal debate in modern Japan today. Our hedge fund source spends a lot of time analyzing Japan's energy policy.
They do.
Japan is basically a mountainous island nation
Right.
with virtually zero domestic fossil fuels. They don't have oil. They don't have vast coal fields. They have to import almost every drop of fuel on a boat. So they have a desperate existential need for what the hedge fund calls energy sovereignty.
Right.
They need baseload nuclear power just to survive and remain an independent industrial economy. But at the exact same time, they possess a deep cultural national trauma, first from the atomic bombs in 1945, and then profoundly from the Fukushima Daiichi disaster in 2011.
Fukushima was the ultimate modern manifestation of Kagar. It was exactly what happens when the reverence for the sleeping giant fails. It was a failure of regulatory foresight, building backup generators too low to the ground, clashing with an immense, unprecedented natural disaster in the form of a tsunami.
Yeah.
So modern Japan is constantly painfully weighing the absolute pragmatic need for energy sovereignty against the deep trauma of the sleeping giant waking up. It is arguably the most complex and nuanced relationship with uranium of any nation on Earth.
It's a heavy burden. So we've talked about the bombs, the danger, and the trauma, but let's pivot to the economics. Because what happened when the world suddenly woke up after the Cold War and realized, hey, the Soviet Union just collapsed, and we have thousands and thousands of these world-ending nuclear warheads just lying around in silos?
This is where we see one of the most remarkable and ultimately economically disruptive geopolitical agreements in modern history. It is the ultimate right-centric pragmatism story.
The megatons to megawatts program. This is absolutely another story to tell at the pub. The Cold War ends. The Soviet Union dissolves into the Russian Federation. The United States and Russia look at their massive arsenals of nuclear missiles pointing at each other, and they decide to do something totally unprecedented. The U.S. government essentially approaches Moscow and says, hey, your economy's collapsing, you need cold, hard cash, we have a booming economy, and we need electricity.
Right.
How about we buy the highly enriched weapons-grade uranium right out of your decommissioned nuclear warheads? We will physically take the cores, dilute the uranium down from 90% weapons-grade to 4% commercial grade, and we will burn it in American commercial nuclear power plants.
From a diplomatic standpoint, it was an exceptionally elegant solution to a massive global security threat. They literally turned swords into plowshares. They took the fuel meant to destroy cities and used it to light them up.
And the mind-blowing statistic from the sources is that for 2 solid decades, from the mid-1990s to the 2010s, 10% of all the electricity generated in the United States was powered by former Soviet nuclear bombs.
That's a crazy stat.
I'll say that again because it's hard to process. For 20 years, 1 in every 10 light bulbs in America, 1 in 10 televisions, 1 in 10 hospital monitors, 1 in 10 refrigerators was powered by the uranium from a Russian nuke that was originally designed to vaporize an American city. It's an incredibly beautiful peace initiative.
It is beautiful from a geopolitical perspective. However, from a financial and commodities standpoint, it was an absolute unmitigated catastrophe for the global uranium mining industry. And this brings us to our fourth complex economic concept, market saturation.
Right. Because if you are a guy in Canada or Australia trying to dig new uranium out of the ground to sell, you suddenly have a huge problem. I'm guessing market saturation means there was just too much stuff available.
It's more insidious than just too much stuff. Market saturation occurs when the volume of a product available in a market completely overwhelms the demand for it, particularly when that volume comes from an unnatural or secondary source.
Okay, that makes sense.
In a normal, healthy commodity market, miners dig up uranium, utility companies buy it to run their power plants, and the price is set by the actual cost of exploring and mining.
Yeah.
But the megatons to megawatts program introduced a massive artificial secondary supply into the market.
Yeah.
The global market was suddenly flooded with thousands of tons of recycled bomb fuel. Because this fuel already existed, the heavy lifting of mining and enriching had been done decades ago by the Soviet military, It could be sold to utilities much, much cheaper than the cost of exploring, permitting, and digging a brand new mine.
The price must have tanked. It fell right through the floor.
Exactly. When a market is saturated with a cheap, subsidized, recycled alternative, the primary producers, the miners, are decimated. Nobody wants to buy newly mined material at $40 a pound when they can buy recycled Russian warheads for $15.
That makes sense.
This massive influx of secondary supply caused what the hedge fund proposal called the lost decades of the 1980s and 1990s for uranium miners. Prices fell so far below the actual cost of physical production that almost all global exploration stopped. Existing mines were shuttered and flooded. And worse, a whole generation of nuclear engineers, geologists, and specialized drillers left the industry to go find work in oil or gold. It completely destroyed the human capital and the physical supply chain.
It's just wild how a massive, noble move for global peace completely ruined an entire sector of the global economy.
It really is.
But we keep talking about human engineering bombs, power plants, Russian warheads, centrifuges. It all sounds so incredibly high-tech and distinctly artificial. But I want to pivot, because the sources have a story that challenges everything we think we know about nuclear reactors being a purely human invention.
Yes. The Oklo natural reactor. This is where the narrative challenges the far-left view that nuclear energy is an unnatural violation of nature.
This sounds like straight-up science fiction, but it is 100% peer-reviewed, accepted geological science. In 1972, a group of French researchers are analyzing uranium ore samples taken from a commercial mine in Oklo, which is a region in the African nation of Gabon.
Right.
Now, uranium naturally has a very specific ratio of isotopes. Specifically, it contains uranium-235, which is the fissile stuff you actually need to create a chain reaction. Everywhere on Earth, the concentration of U-235 in natural ore is exactly 0.72%. You can test a rock in Canada, a rock in Australia, or a rock in your backyard, and it's always 0.72%.
Always.
But the samples from Gabon came back at 0.71%. It was missing a tiny fraction of its U-235.
To a nuclear physicist, finding ore with too little U-235 is not just a rounding error. It is like opening a sealed bank vault that hasn't been touched in a century and finding a half-eaten sandwich inside.
I love that.
It means a highly specific nuclear reaction has already taken place, consuming that missing isotope.
Exactly. So they investigate the geology of the Oklo mine, and the reveal is stunning. 2 billion years ago, long before dinosaurs, long before even multicellular life existed, the natural conditions in that specific spot in Gabon were absolutely perfect.
The perfect storm.
The uranium ore in the ground was highly concentrated, and natural groundwater seeped into the sandstone deposit. The water acted as a natural moderator.
Let's explain that mechanism, because it's vital. A moderator slows down the fast neutrons emitted by decaying uranium. If the neutrons are moving too fast, they just bounce off other atoms. But if the water slows them down, they can be captured by other U-235 atoms, splitting them and releasing more neutrons in immense heat.
Right. So the groundwater slowed the neutrons, and the ore literally went critical right there in the dirt. Mother Nature built a natural functioning nuclear reactor in the Earth's crust.
It's incredible.
And it didn't just explode. As the reaction heated up, it would boil the groundwater away into steam. Without the water acting as a moderator, the reaction would naturally shut down. The rock would cool off, the water would seep back in, and the reactor would turn back on. It was a naturally regulating, pulsing nuclear reactor that ran continuously for hundreds of thousands of years.
It is a remarkable geological anomaly. And ideologically, it completely upends the argument that splitting the atom is some unnatural crime against the natural order. Nature did it first 2 billion years ago, perfectly balancing the reaction with groundwater.
But the hedge fund source makes it very clear, while nature did it by accident 2 billion years ago, replicating that exact process today to power a modern city is incredibly mind-numbingly difficult.
Oh, absolutely.
We don't just dig up a rock and set it on fire like coal. Humans have to go through a massively complex, multi-stage process called the nuclear fuel cycle just to get that same reaction.
Let's use the hedge fund insights to break down the mechanics of this modern alchemy, because understanding this highly regulated, technically difficult fuel cycle is crucial to understanding why the hedge fund believes there's a massive investment opportunity right now.
Okay, let's do it.
The fuel cycle is divided into 3 main stages: upstream, midstream, and downstream.
Let's walk the listener through it because it's fascinating. Step 1, upstream. This is the mining. This is getting the spicy dirt out of the ground.
Correct. You extract the raw ore, crush it in a mill, and use chemical solvents to separate the uranium from the waste rock. You dry it into a concentrated powder known as U3O8, which is universally referred to in the industry as yellow cake.
Yellow cake.
But yellow cake is useless on its own. You can't just shovel it into a nuclear reactor. It has to move to step 2, the midstream.
And according to the hedge fund, the midstream is the ultimate global bottleneck. This is where the supply chain gets terrifyingly narrow.
Yes. The solid yellow cake must first be shipped to a conversion facility. Here, through a highly toxic and complex chemical process involving hydrofluoric acid, the solid yellow cake is converted into uranium trioxide, or UO3, and then fluorinated into uranium hexafluoride gas, UF6.
They literally turn a heavy rock into a gas.
They do.
And the crazy part is, the hedge fund notes there are only 5 large-scale commercial conversion facilities operating on the entire planet. 5. In France, Russia, Canada, China, and the U.S. If just one of those facilities has a mechanical failure or a strike, the entire global grid starts to sweat.
And once it's in a gaseous state, it moves to the enrichment phase. This is the part you constantly hear about on the news regarding rogue nations.
Right.
You pump the UF6 gas into massive cascading banks of centrifuges. These machines spin at supersonic speeds. The mechanical goal is to separate the slightly lighter U-235 isotope from the heavier U-238. Because U-238 is marginally heavier, the centrifugal force pushes it to the outer wall of the spinning cylinder, while the lighter U-235 gas remains closer to the center, where it is siphoned off. You spin it through thousands of these centrifuges until you raise the concentration of U-235 from its natural 0.7% up to the 3 to 5% required for a commercial light water reactor.
And once you've enriched it, you move to step 3 downstream. You take that enriched gas and you undergo another chemical process to turn it back into a solid. Specifically, you press and bake it into small, hard black ceramic pellets made of uranium dioxide, or UO2.
And this is where we get to the most staggering statistic regarding energy density in the entire document.
The gummy bear stat. I absolutely love this. Our sources point out that a single finished UO2 ceramic pellet is roughly the exact same size as the standard gummy bear.
Think about that.
Just a tiny little black cylinder. But the potential energy trapped inside the atomic bonds of that single gummy bear-sized pellet is exactly equal to the energy you would get from physically burning 1 full ton of black coal or 149 gallons of crude oil.
It is unparalleled energy density. The physical footprint of the fuel required to run a city is infinitesimally small compared to fossil fuels.
And furthermore, the sources explicitly note that despite the public fear driven largely by the far-left view and the specter of Chernobyl, the actual mortality rate of nuclear energy is vastly lower than fossil fuels.
It's not even close.
When you look at deaths per terawatt-hour of electricity produced, the numbers are stark. It's 0.03 deaths for nuclear compared to nearly 25 deaths for coal due to mining accidents and respiratory illnesses from air pollution. It is mathematically the safest, most dense energy on Earth. But getting it from the raw dirt to the finished pellet requires threading a global needle of massive bottlenecks.
Which brings us to the geopolitical reality of today. If this fuel cycle is so incredibly difficult, so chemically complex, who actually controls the spigot? Who are the modern powerhouses dictating the flow of this energy?
Right. I asked earlier where the WWI uranium came from, and it was the Congo. If I ask you today, who mines the most uranium in the world? You might guess the United States, or maybe Russia, or Canada's Athabasca Basin. But the undisputed heavyweight king of spicy dirt today is Kazakhstan.
The Central Asian nation of Kazakhstan produces over 40% of the world's primary uranium supply.
And they don't dig massive, mile-wide open pit holes in the ground with giant dump trucks. They don't send guys down with pickaxes. They use a method called in situ leaching. Break the mechanics of this down because it sounds crazy compared to traditional mining.
In situ leaching, or ISR, is a chemical mining method where instead of moving the rock to the surface, you move the uranium through the rock.
Wow.
The uranium in Kazakhstan is trapped in porous sandstone aquifers, so they drill a precise grid of injection and recovery wells directly into the ore body underground. Then they pump massive amounts of a chemical leaching solution, in Kazakhstan's case, highly concentrated sulfuric acid down into the earth. The acid flows through the porous sandstone like water through a giant sponge, dissolving the uranium right there in the ground. They then pump the uranium-rich liquid back up to the surface and use ion exchange resins to strip the heavy metal out of the water. It is incredibly cheap, fast, and gives Kazakhstan a massive competitive advantage over hard rock miners in places like Canada who actually have to blast and move solid rock.
But the hedge fund points out a massive vulnerability in this dominance, introducing our fifth economic term, monopoly power, or, more accurately in this specific market, an oligopoly.
An oligopoly exists when a market is shared by a very small number of producers or sellers. Because Kazakhstan controls 40% of the market, their state-owned mining company, Kazatomprom, effectively acts as the central bank of uranium. They have the power to dictate global prices by turning their production spigots up or down. If they sneeze, the global market catches a cold.
And right now, according to the hedge fund, Kazakhstan is actually struggling. They literally cannot source enough sulfuric acid to pump into the ground to maintain their massive production targets. The chemical supply chain is failing them. And when the guy who controls 40% of the global faucet says, hey guys, we might be a few £1 million short this year, the entire world panics.
And this supply panic on the upstream side, the lack of acid in Kazakhstan is colliding violently with a massive, unprecedented demand shock on the downstream side. The hedge fund's entire investment thesis revolves around what they call a structural deficit.
Let's talk about the demand side, because this is where the modern tech world crashes headfirst into this ancient rock. I want you, the listener, to think about this next time you use ChatGPT or stream a movie.
Yeah.
Why is uranium spiking right now? It's not just about keeping the old 1970s reactors running.
No.
It is because of Silicon Valley. It is because of the explosive growth of artificial intelligence.
The data presented in the investment proposal regarding future electricity demand is staggering. Artificial intelligence is driving a macro electricity shock. We aren't just talking about people charging a few more laptops. We are talking about hyperscale data centers the size of multiple football fields.
A normal server rack in a standard cloud data center, the kind that stores your emails or iCloud photos, requires about 100 kilowatts of power to run and cool. An AI server rack running the massive clustered GPUs needed for machine learning and deep neural networks requires up to 600 kilowatts.
That is massive.
That is a 6x multiplier on power density. Goldman Sachs is predicting a 175% surge in data center power demand by the year 2030.
To put that abstract percentage into perspective, that is the equivalent of adding the total electricity demand of an entire top 10 power-consuming nation directly to the global electricity grid in just 6 years, strictly to power algorithms and cooling fans.
And here's the absolute kicker. These AI data centers cannot afford to lose power, ever. If the power cuts out, the AI training run fails, and the tech company loses tens of millions of dollars. They require what the tech industry calls 5 nines reliability.
Yeah.
That means the electrical power must be on and perfectly stable 99.999% of the time.
This specific requirement is where the narrative shifts away from renewables.
Yeah.
For years, the political push has been heavily toward wind and solar energy. But wind and solar are inherently intermittent. The wind stops blowing, the sun goes down, or a storm rolls in. They cannot, by the laws of physics, provide the 247 uninterrupted, carbon-free baseload power required for 5 nines reliability without astronomically expensive continent-sized battery backups. Nuclear energy, however, runs at a 92% capacity factor. It is essentially always on.
That's why the biggest tech companies in the world, Microsoft, Google, Amazon, are now literally underwriting the nuclear renaissance. They aren't just buying credits. They are signing multi-billion-dollar power purchase agreements to buy direct nuclear power, and in some cases, they are funding the restart of decommissioned reactors.
That's a huge shift.
And if you add the fact that we sold 17 million electric vehicles globally in 2023, all of which need to be plugged into a grid that we are desperately trying to decarbonize, you have a massive structural energy crisis on the horizon.
So we have explosive, non-discretionary demand for electricity. But as the hedge fund thoroughly outlines, the supply side isn't just suffering from a lack of sulfuric acid in Kazakhstan. It is being violently squeezed by a massive geopolitical choke point. We are seeing a complete bifurcation of the global supply chain.
The Iron Curtain is coming back, but this time it's not made of ideology, it's made of uranium.
Precisely. Remember the midstream bottleneck we discussed? The enrichment process with the centrifuges. Currently, Russia controls roughly 40% of the world's commercial enrichment capacity. But due to the geopolitical situation, the Western world is frantically trying to disconnect from Russian influence.
Right.
The U.S. recently passed the Prohibiting Russian Uranium Imports Act, which legally bans the import of Russian low-enriched uranium.
I have to push back here, or at least point out the absolute insanity of this timing. Let me make sure I have this straight. We have the biggest technology boom in human history with AI. demanding virtually infinite, highly reliable, clean power. And right at the exact moment that demand goes totally vertical, the Western world is legally banning its own access to 40% of the biggest nuclear fuel processing facilities on Earth. That sounds like economic suicide.
It is an incredibly dangerous structural pinch point. The West is now scrambling to friendshore their enrichment. They are desperately trying to build new domestic capacity in the US, Canada, and Europe to replace the Russian supply.
Hmm.
But you cannot build a highly regulated, mathematically precise centrifuge facility overnight. It takes years and billions of dollars of capital expenditure.
It's not just the enriched stuff. The geopolitics of the raw dirt are getting crazy, too.
Yeah.
In 2023, there was a military coup in Niger, Africa. Now, Niger historically supplied a massive chunk of raw uranium to France to run their vast nuclear fleet. The new military regime immediately suspended exports to the French, cutting off a major artery of European power.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, China, who is planning an absolutely staggering build-out of 150 new nuclear reactors by 2035, is running around the globe quietly locking down physical supply. They have been buying up massive majority stakes in some of the biggest open-pit mines in the world, like the Husab and Russing mines in Namibia.
China is securing its end-to-end fuel cycle for the next century. They are playing a 100-year game, while the West is just waking up to the fact that they allowed their domestic supply chains and human capital to completely atrophy during the lost decades caused by the megatons to megawatts program.
It is a perfect storm. You have raw supply shocks, enrichment bottlenecks, a tech-driven demand explosion, and a geopolitical division of the globe. Which brings us to our final synthesis. Based on everything in these deeply contrasting sources, let's offer some specific masterclass lessons for the different players sitting at your table today.
Let's start with a finance professional, the banker evaluating this sector. The key lesson here involves our final complex economic term, inelastic supply. The uranium market is what financial analysts call a severely lumpy market.
Explain inelastic supply to the banker listening right now. Why does uranium behave so weirdly compared to, say, producing more smartphones?
Inelastic supply means that the quantity of a good produced cannot easily or quickly respond to a change in price. In a normal market, if the price of widgets doubles, a factory manager just runs a night shift, hires more workers, and produces more widgets the next week.
Right.
But uranium is incredibly inelastic. It takes 10 to 15 years of geological surveying, complex environmental permitting, indigenous community consultation, and massive heavy engineering just to bring a single new mine online. So even if the spot price of uranium skyrockets to $1 million a pound tomorrow morning, you literally cannot print more of it.
Wow.
The supply cannot stretch to meet the demand. Therefore, the market does nothing for 10 years, putting all the investors asleep, and then when a physical deficit hits, the price goes up 10x in 6 months. It is an environment of extreme, violent price discovery.
Okay, lesson 2 is for the politician or the policymaker listening. The lesson is simple, and it leans heavily into the right-centric view. Nationalism is back, and it's powered by heavy metal. The era of assuming a smooth, globalized supply chain is over.
Completely over.
If your nation does not have absolute control over its own nuclear fuel cycle, from digging the dirt to the conversion to the enrichment centrifuges, you are not a truly sovereign nation.
The politician must realize that relying on adversarial or unstable nations for the baseload power that keeps your hospitals and data centers running is a catastrophic strategic vulnerability. As the hedge fund notes bluntly, if you don't control your energy, you are just renting your existence from foreign powers.
Lesson 3 is for the financial trader or the gambler who is trying to play this market and make a quick buck. Our hedge fund source offers a very stark warning for you.
Yes, the explicit warning is against playing the spot price. The daily spot market for uranium is very thinly traded and is driven largely by short-term sentiment and retail panic. The real smart money ignores the spot price entirely.
They're looking further out.
Exactly. They watch the long-term utility contracts. Nuclear power plants don't buy fuel for tomorrow. They buy fuel 3 to 15 years in advance. The indicator to watch is the spot term spread, or financial instruments like the Sprott Physical Uranium Trust, SPUD, which takes physical pounds of uranium off the open market and locks them away in a vault, accelerating the structural deficit. The gamblers play the daily swings. The smart money positions itself ahead of the multi-year structural reality.
And finally, the most important lesson is for the everyday person, you, the listener. The lesson is to take these concepts and use these stories. The next time you are at a dinner party and someone starts arguing vehemently about green energy or the evils of nuclear power based on a headline they read, don't just quote boring statistics at them.
Right, tell them the stories.
Tell them about the Roman glass in 79 AD. Tell them about Edgar Sengier shipping 1,200 tons of 65% pure rock from the Congo in 1940 to corner a market that didn't even exist yet. Tell them about the Oklo natural reactor running perfectly in the earth 2 billion years before humans even walked upright.
Remind them that uranium is not just some new 20th century political talking point to be argued over on cable news. It is an ancient, fundamental, elemental force of the universe. It was here long before us, forging its energy in the stars, and it will be here long after us. We're simply a species in our technological adolescence, just now trying to figure out how to safely speak its language.
Exactly. It's the spicy burt. It's the heavy metal. We are just trying to learn how to harness it without burning the house down.
And as we consider the future of this conversation, I want to leave you with one final, deeply provocative thought that emerges when you combine the hedge fund's financial data with the deep history we've discussed. We established that artificial intelligence data centers are demanding unprecedented, astronomical amounts of highly reliable nuclear baseload power just to exist and compute. These AI models are becoming exponentially smarter every month, moving rapidly toward artificial general intelligence. If the very physical survival and operational capacity of these superintelligent systems become fundamentally dependent on a 99.999% reliable supply of uranium fuel to keep their servers from going dark,
Oh, man.
how long will it be until the AI systems themselves calculate the geopolitical risks, realize the human supply chain vulnerabilities we just discussed, and begin algorithmically directing capital to acquire global uranium assets simply to ensure their own survival?
Oh, wow. So the machines bypass the humans to secure their own atomic batteries. That is a truly chilling thought to end on. Just remember, whatever you do in this world, whether you're a Roman aristocrat decorating a villa, a 16th century silver miner cursing his luck, or an advanced AI algorithm trying to keep the lights on, don't tickle the dragon's tail. If you like this talk, please subscribe and like this channel. We need your support to keep bringing you these deep dives into the weirdest, most impactful stories on Earth. Stay curious and stay skeptical. See you next time.